You ever hold the door open for somebody, thinking you're doing a kindness, only to watch them walk straight through your life like it's theirs to rearrange? Sometimes betrayal don't come with a bang. It's 1,000 little silences. The way someone lingers too long in your mirror. The way your stories start sounding sweeter from their lips. The way your phone grows quieter, day by day, till even your own shadow feels borrowed. This story ain't about rage. It's about erosion. Slow, soft, and devastating. So if you enjoy stories like these, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd subscribe, give it a like, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Sometimes it helps knowing who's out there sharing the silence. Now, let me take you back to the morning it all began. There was a wine glass left on my bathroom counter. That's what I remember first. Not the storm that came after. Not the letters left unanswered. Not even the moment I realized I'd been replaced. Just that single, ridiculous glass. Stem smudged. Lipstick unfamiliar. And the faint scent of lavender, and envy clinging to its rim. It sat there bold as brass beside my toothbrush. Like it had every right to exist in my sanctuary. And something about that, the quiet audacity of it, made my fingers go numb. I'd opened my door to her with open arms and linen sheets. She said she needed shelter. Said she was lost. Said she admired the life I'd built. What she meant was, I want it. The rain came early that morning, soft and strange like a lullaby meant to deceive. I remember because Muffin, my old tortoiseshell cat, refused to leave the windowsill. Her tail twitching with the sort of suspicion only cats seem born knowing. I'd just finished folding the last of the laundry, still warm with the scent of lavender and lemon soap, when I saw the glass. There in the bathroom, where it had no earthly reason to be. Not mine. Not my daughter's. And certainly not a guest's. Not unless she'd forgotten which side of the house she slept on. But by then those lines had already begun to blur, hadn't they? The woman I'd welcomed into my home was meant to stay a few weeks. Just until she got back on her feet, she'd said. We met through church. She was soft-spoken, thoughtful, wore grief like a second skin. Her husband had died. She'd moved to Charleston for a fresh start. I saw myself in her, in the tender wreckage she carried. So I said yes. I always do. I offered her my guest room, my garden, my second pair of rain boots. And over time she took more than I knew I was giving. I suppose I'm telling you this now because some betrayals don't come with knives. They come with perfume and kindness and long silences at supper. And because today when I opened my closet and found my favorite scarf missing, the rose-colored one my late husband gave me, I thought of her. Not with anger. Not even with grief. Just a hollow sort of knowing. Charleston in early spring is a kind of enchantment. The air smells of jasmine and wet stone, and the sidewalks shimmer with memory. My house, white-clapboard, a porch swing creaking gently under the mossy oaks, has stood on the corner of Larkspur and 2nd for nearly 70 years. It's a widow's house now. Quiet, but not empty. Every room carries some whisper of my late husband Henry. The way he folded the newspaper, the jazz records filed alphabetically, the creaky third stair he refused to fix because it warned the house I was coming. I've lived alone since he passed 8 years ago, save for Muffin, my fiercely independent feline companion, and the occasional visit from my grown children. Life moved gentle, predictable. I had my roses, my book club, the Tuesday soup kitchen shift, and a deep drawer full of stationery I still used for real letters. Then came Adrian. She arrived one Sunday after service, standing awkwardly near the coffee urn with a paper cup held like a shield. I'd seen her twice before, once near the candle altar, once sitting alone in the back pew, but never heard her speak. That day, the pastor mentioned she was new to Charleston, recently widowed, and in need of prayer and community. It was like someone had cracked a window in my chest. I remember the weight of her eyes, green unreadable, and the way her fingers kept curling into her sleeve like she needed anchoring. So I approached. She smiled, faint and apologetic. Adrian, she said. Just moved here from Athens. I'm still figuring things out. We spoke for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing deep. Just weather, music, the strangeness of starting over. But there was something in her that echoed something in me. The quiet ache, the way she blinked too long between words. I invited her to join me for coffee later that week. She said yes. From there it was small things. A Sunday lunch. A visit to the farmer's market. I learned she had no children. No job yet. That she used to paint but hadn't touched a brush in years. She liked Nina Simone, couldn't cook to save her life, and loved lavender but hated roses. Too showy, she said. When I offered her my guest room for a few weeks, just until she got settled, she hesitated. I don't want to impose. You're not, I told her. Sometimes, we just need someone to hold the door open. She moved in that weekend. Brought only 3 suitcases, a small stack of canvases, and a bottle of her late husband's cologne. I gave her the blue room upstairs, the one that used to be Henry's study. She cried the first night. I heard her through the vent. I didn't know then how deeply she'd begin to root herself into my world, or how, over time, my friends would start inviting her to things I wasn't told about. That she'd find her way into my volunteer shifts, my book club, even my hairdresser's good graces. But in the beginning, it felt good to be needed again. To laugh with someone over burnt toast. To come home and find music playing softly in the kitchen. That first month, we were 2 women patching grief with cinnamon tea and shared silence. But shadows don't always fall loudly, my dear. Sometimes, they arrive wearing your slippers. It's funny the things you overlook when you want to believe someone belongs. The first few weeks Adrian lived with me, everything felt warm. We shared our stories like old quilts, frayed at the edges but still full of use. I told her about Henry, about how we met at a record store just after the war, how he used to sing Billie Holiday while painting the porch. She told me about Matthew, her late husband, said he'd been a professor of art history, that he died suddenly one afternoon while grading papers. There was grief in her voice, but also precision, like she'd told the story enough times to wear it smooth. She was helpful at first. Washed the dishes without asking. Trimmed my roses under my gentle instruction. Even helped catalog the boxes in the attic I'd long pretended didn't exist. My friends were charmed. She's good company for you, they said. You needed a little energy around here. Adrian had that way about her. She listened just right. Remembered your dog's name. Noticed the details others missed, the tremor in your hands the moment you got quiet. People trusted her quickly. I suppose I did too. But then came the subtle shifts. One morning I came home from the grocer's and found her in my reading chair. The one Henry built for me after I'd broken my ankle that winter, with her legs tucked up and one of my journals open in her lap. She looked up startled, then smiled like it was no trespass at all. I didn't mean to pry, she said. Just, your handwriting is beautiful. I laughed it off but something pulled tight in my chest. That journal held memories I hadn't spoken aloud in decades. A few days later, she started joining me at the soup kitchen. Said she wanted to give back. I was proud at first. Introduced her to Alma, my longtime co-volunteer, and to Pastor Glenn. They welcomed her with open arms. Soon, they started asking about her when I wasn't around. Adrian said the funniest thing the other day. Adrian made that cranberry pie last week, didn't she? Adrienne's got such a gentle way with the guests. I smiled. I did. But inside, it was like watching someone try on my skin. Then came the book club. We met once a month at rotating houses. I'd been hosting it for 15 years. A small circle of women who'd laughed and wept and grown gray together. Adrian attended one night as a guest and was radiant, sharp, thoughtful, just contrarian enough to seem interesting. The women adored her. By the next meeting, she was offering suggestions for our next read. By the third, she was leading the discussion. I wasn't asked. I just watched. And each time someone said her name with that fondness, that warmth they used to reserve for me, something inside me quieted further. But it was the night of my birthday when the first real tears showed. I'd planned a small dinner. 6 close friends, potluck style, with jazz on the record player and lemon cake from Ruth's Bakery. Adrian offered to help. Said she'd handle the invites. When I came downstairs, the table was set beautifully. There were candles, flowers, even my best china I hadn't touched since Henry died. And guests, yes, but not the ones I'd hoped for. Half of them were hers. People from her painting class. A couple from church I barely knew. My dearest friend June hadn't even been told. Oh, Adrian said brightly, kissing my cheek. I thought you'd enjoy meeting new folks. You always say you don't get out enough. I smiled. said thank you. But that night, after everyone left and the dishes were drying, I stood in my kitchen staring at the darkened window, wondering whose reflection looked back. Because it sure wasn't mine. It was around that time I started forgetting things. Or at least, that's what Adrian said. You mentioned it yesterday, she'd say with a gentle smile, her hand brushing my arm. Don't you remember? Sometimes I didn't. Other times I knew I hadn't. But her tone made me feel foolish for questioning it. That's the thing about subtle manipulation. It sounds like kindness with a sugar crust. It began with phone calls. I'd notice missed messages from Alma or June, friends I hadn't heard from in a while. When I'd ask, they'd say, "Oh, Adrian said you were tied up." Or she mentioned you weren't feeling well. I wasn't sick. I wasn't busy. But suddenly, I was invisible. Adrian, it turned out, had begun answering the phone when I was in the garden or out running errands. She'd say I was napping or too tired or needed space. She meant well, she said. You need more rest. You do so much, Ellie. Let people help. One afternoon, I went to my standing hair appointment with Lorna, been going to her for nearly 20 years, only to find Adrian in the chair, laughing and sipping sweet tea like she'd always belonged there. Oh, she exclaimed when she saw me. I told Lorna you might not make it. You'd mentioned a headache, remember? I hadn't. Lorna looked apologetic. We thought it best not to let the slot go to waste. I stood there, purse on my arm, unsure what to say. Adrian slid off the chair, her new trim shimmering. You can take my place, of course, she said. I'll reschedule. I let her leave with that smug, saccharine smile. And I sat there, stiff in the chair, the scissors clicking near my ear, feeling something awful rise in me, like water lapping just beneath the floorboards. The worst part? I doubted myself. I began writing things down in my planner obsessively. Times, conversations, grocery lists. I'd sneak glances at my own handwriting just to prove I hadn't imagined a moment. Because with Adrian around, my world started slipping out of focus. I'd go to grab my blue cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons, only to find it draped over her shoulders. I'd reach for my favorite tea, only to find the tin empty, replaced by her organic blends. Even Muffin, my cat, began sleeping in Adrian's bed. That hurt more than I care to admit. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. When she didn't just borrow my life, she started offering it to others as if it were hers to give. It was a Tuesday when I learned she'd taken my job. I don't mean a paid position. Lord knows the soup kitchen never gave us more than aprons and sorebacks, but it was mine in the truest sense. Every Tuesday for 6 years, I prepped meals at Gray Street Shelter, a place full of faces that knew my name, my stories, my silly jokes about overcooked lentils. That morning, I arrived as usual, wearing my navy headscarf and carrying a loaf of banana bread I'd baked the night before. Only the door was already propped open, and laughter spilled out like water down a drain. Inside, Adrian was standing behind the counter in my apron. Not just any apron, my apron. The one Alma embroidered for me last Christmas, with Miss Ellie stitched in gold thread above a rose. She was stirring soup and smiling like a hostess at her own wedding. Alma waved from across the room, but didn't come over. Pastor Glenn gave me a polite nod, and returned to chopping onions. I just stood there, the banana bread growing heavier in my hands. Oh, Ellie, Adrian called when she saw me, wiping her hands. You didn't have to come. I told them you were taking some time. I blinked. Why would you say that? She shrugged. You've been looking tired, that's all. I thought a little rest might help. My voice was paper thin. I never said I wasn't coming. I must have misunderstood, she said, looking genuinely puzzled. Anyway, everything's under control. We've got it covered today. Maybe you could use this time for yourself. I wanted to scream, to take back the apron, to throw that loaf of bread through the kitchen window. Instead, I nodded and left. The banana bread never made it past the parking lot. I dropped it in the trash with trembling fingers and sat in my car for a long time, watching raindrops trail down the windshield like veins. That night, I called June. Something's not right, I said. She's changing things. Taking things. June was quiet on the other end. Then, she mentioned you'd been feeling confused lately, forgetting things. I nearly dropped the phone. Ellie, she added softly. Maybe she's just trying to help. Maybe you're overthinking it. And just like that, the doubt thickened. Adrian had laid the groundwork, little by little, whisper by whisper. She hadn't just slipped into my life. She was rewriting it, casting me as the frail old woman and herself as the benevolent caretaker. It was brilliant in a wicked sort of way, because the more I resisted, the more I looked like the thing she claimed I was. Paranoid, aging, a burden. I tried to push back. I told Adrian gently at first that I needed space, that I preferred she not wear my clothes or speak on my behalf, or touch certain keepsakes. She nodded every time, agreed wholeheartedly. And the very next day, I'd find my silk scarf on her dresser. A letter I'd tucked in my nightstand moved. A friend visiting the house saying, Adrian said you might not feel up to hosting. And then came the gallery night. A flyer appeared on the fridge. New Voices in Southern Art, featuring Adrian Blake. She'd started painting again. I hadn't even known. The exhibit was held at a small gallery downtown. I attended quietly, wearing a modest dress and no expectations. But the moment I walked in, I froze. Her paintings, they were of my garden, my porch, the light through my parlor window at dawn. One was unmistakably my bedroom, seen from the hallway like a voyeur's gaze. Another showed a silhouette of a woman curled in the reading chair Henry built. Me, unmistakably me. Except her face was obscured by shadow. And under each canvas was her name. Only hers. Someone nearby said, she lives with this sweet older woman who took her in. Said she was practically family. Family. She never once mentioned my name. That night, I stood in a room full of strangers admiring stolen glimpses of my world. And I realized, she hadn't just taken pieces of my life. She'd taken my reflection. After the gallery, something in me shifted. Not loud, not explosive, but like the quiet closing of a door I hadn't meant to shut. I didn't confront her that night. I simply went home, took off my shoes by the back door, and sat in the darkened kitchen listening to the fridge hum. Adrian came home late, humming to herself. I watched her from the hallway as she peeled off her coat, radiant with attention. She paused when she saw me. You came, she said, surprised. I nodded. Beautiful paintings. Her smile softened. I hoped you'd be proud. Bride. That's what she called it. Not violation. Not erasure. I didn't see my name anywhere, I said. She tilted her head, confused. Why would your name be there? I said nothing. And neither did she. Just walked past me, silent and barefoot, as though the very air belonged to her now. The days that followed were quiet, deceptively so. But the tension had settled like dust in every corner of my house. My friends grew distant or wary. Invitations that once came with open arms now arrived with qualifiers. Adrian said you were needing time. Hope you're doing better. Take care of yourself, sweetheart. The more I insisted I was fine, the more I looked unwell. And Adrian? She flourished. She began hosting. First little tea hours in the garden, then small dinners. I'd return from errands to find folding chairs out back, the good china laid out, and women from my church sipping wine beneath my dogwoods. Oh, I thought you'd be at Ruth's, she'd say with a cheery wave. We didn't want to bother you. Once, I overheard her say to someone, Ellie's memory's just not what it used to be. Poor thing. I try to help where I can. Poor thing. That was the first time I cried. Not over the gallery, not over the scarf or the chair or the friends lost. But those two words. Spoken with pity. Said like a eulogy while I was still breathing. I tried reaching out to my daughter, Margaret. She lived in Atlanta, worked too much, called too little, but she was mine. She'd see it surely. I dialed and tried to sound calm. Mama, she said. Are you okay? I think someone's trying to take over my life. I said too fast. Her name's Adrian. I let her stay, and now she's. A pause. You mean the woman you said was helping you out? The one who's been calling me with updates. I blinked. She's been what? Margaret sighed. She said you'd been struggling. That she didn't want to worry me but thought I should know. No. Iwisparat. That's not true. I didn't ask her to. Mama, she said gently. Maybe you're just overwhelmed. Maybe it's time we talked about getting you some help. A nurse or assisted care. I felt the floor tilt. My own daughter, who barely knew Adrian, was starting to believe her. That night I locked my bedroom door for the first time in 20 years. And I slept with the lamp on, because something wasn't just wrong anymore. It was dangerous. It's a terrible thing, my dear, when your own house stops feeling like home. I took to walking more in the mornings, long loops around the neighborhood, my hands deep in my coat pockets, eyes watching the clouds shift. It gave me distance, breath, a place to be where Adrian wasn't. But even then, I'd return to changes. Books missing from their shelves. My favorite teacup, accidentally broken. The old cuckoo clock Henry restored in '81, taken down for dusting and never returned. One morning I noticed the mail had already been collected, something I'd always done myself. When I asked about it, Adrian gave a soft smile. I didn't want you slipping on the porch steps again. Thought I'd take care of it. Again? I'd never slipped. I began to fear the mail was being opened before I saw it. Bills, letters, invitations, they trickled slower. Some didn't come at all. One Sunday, I found a folded flyer on Adrienne's desk. Advanced Elder Care Planning, a workshop for future guardians. My name wasn't mentioned, but my address was listed in pencil at the top. That same week, I lost my keys. Then my glasses. Then, for nearly 2 hours, I couldn't find Muffin, only to discover her shut in the linen closet, panting and dazed. Adrian said she must have wandered in. Might be time to think about rehoming her, she suggested like it was nothing. You know, for her safety. I stared at her, heart pounding. This is my home. Adrian tilted her head. Of course it is. I'm just here to help. Help. That word had become a noose. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my neighbor Evelyn May. She was old Charleston stock, spine like a ruler, and still baked her own bread at 81. We hadn't been close, but I trusted her eyes. Evelyn, I said, would you mind stopping by this week? There's something I'd like your opinion on. She came the next day with apple jam and cautious curiosity. We sat in the parlor. I poured tea, hands trembling, and told her everything, from the wine glass to the gallery to the missed calls and the flyer. She listened without interrupting. Then she set her cup down and said, Ellie, this woman is grooming your life to fit hers. It was the first time someone said it out loud. And it cracked something open in me. She's isolating you, Evelyn continued, making you doubt yourself. That's not help. That's control. I wept. Quiet, relieved tears. Finally someone saw. Do you have a copy of your will? She asked gently. I nodded. Locked in my desk drawer. Evelyn's mouth tightened. Change the lock. So I did. That night, with Evelyn standing guard, I replaced the desk lock and moved every important document into a sealed box beneath the floorboard in my closet. A trick Henry taught me long ago. The next day, Adrian was different. She didn't ask where I'd been. Didn't smile. Didn't mention Evelyn's visit. But I caught her in the hall, eyes narrowed, watching me like a shadow watches light. Later that evening, I found my journal missing. The current one. The blue leather bound I kept tucked under my pillow. When I asked, she said simply, I thought you said I could borrow it. I never said that. Her voice was soft. Maybe you forgot. My dear. That was the moment I knew. Adrian wasn't just slipping into my life. She was preparing to replace me. It happened on a Thursday. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, and the air hung heavy, as if the whole town was holding its breath. I remember the way the wind bent the rose canes in the garden, petals clinging for dear life. Something in me matched that feeling. I hadn't spoken much to Adrian in days, not since the journal went missing. I searched everywhere. Under the bed, behind drawers, even in the fireplace grate. Nothing. And when I asked again, she only offered that same half-smile and shrugged. It's just a notebook, Ellie. But it wasn't. It held my thoughts, my memories, my version of the truth. So when Evelyn called that morning and said, we need to talk now, I didn't hesitate. She arrived in her raincoat, no jam this time, face drawn tight. She handed me a printout. What's this? A listing, she said. For a house. Downtown. Historic property, 2 beds fully furnished. I blinked. What's that got to do with me? Evelyn tapped the bottom of the page. There, in faint print, it said, Previous owner downsizing to assisted care. Sale coordinated by live-in guardian, Adrian Blake. My throat went dry. She's trying to sell your house. My knees buckled. Evelyn caught me by the arm, guiding me to the chair. I never agreed. She doesn't need your agreement, Evelyn said. If she's convinced enough people you're unwell. If she's got access to your papers. No. Y whisperat. She doesn't. I locked them away. Evelyn looked at me. Did you tell her where? I hadn't. But my silence gave me away. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, watching the door. At 2:14 a.m., it creaked open. I didn't move. Adrian stepped in barefoot, hair loose, holding something in her hand. The journal. She crossed the room slowly, placed it on the nightstand. You left this in the garden, she said. No, I didn't. Her voice was soft. You're tired, Ellie. You need someone to help manage things. I don't. She looked at me. Not with pity this time. Not even malice. Just calm certainty. You're not well. And that's when I knew she had a plan. It wasn't just the house. It was me. She would make me the problem. The burden. The story no one questioned. And then she'd become the one left standing. The next morning, I made 3 calls. One to my lawyer, old Mr. Wells, nearly retired but still sharp as a carving knife. One to Margaret, though I dreaded it. And one to the locksmith. I didn't tell Adrian. I just smiled over breakfast, let her take the last of the orange marmalade, and told her I'd be at the church for a while. Alma asked me to help reorganize the pantry. She nodded like nothing was strange. But I caught her eyes lingering on my coat, my keys, the drawer where I kept the mailbox spare. By the time I returned home that afternoon, locks changed and documents secure in Evelyn's care, I knew I had a narrow window left. Adrian was waiting in the parlor. My scarf around her shoulders, Henry's gift to me. She was holding a photograph, one of the few I kept framed. Me and Henry barefoot on the beach, the wind turning my dress into wings. I always loved this one, she said without turning. Put it down. She did. Gently. As if it were hers to return. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. What have I done to you? She looked at me for a long moment. You opened the door, she said. And I walked through. Isn't that what you wanted? I offered kindness. Shelter. She smiled, small and rueful. No one gives without wanting something. You needed to feel needed. I just gave you that. You stole my friends. My place at church. My voice in my own home. Adrienne's expression didn't change. I didn't steal anything. I filled what you were already losing. And there it was, the knife not in the back but straight in the heart. She didn't think she'd taken anything. She believed she'd earned it. Did you ever care? I asked. About you, she said. At first. My knees went weak. I sank into the armchair, Henry's old seat, and held the fabric like an anchor. Muffin jumped into my lap, the one soul who hadn't been seduced by Adrienne's sugar. She stood there, watching me with that quiet pity she wore like a silk robe. I'll make this easier, she said. Just let go. Let me help. No. She blinked. I'm not confused. I'm not fading. And you will not rewrite my life into something convenient for you. A flicker of something passed over her face, surprise maybe, even fear. I leaned forward. You've underestimated me. I am not fragile. I am furious. She didn't respond, just turned and walked out of the room. That night I packed her things. Every last scarf, canvas, and glass. I placed them on the porch, covered neatly with a tarp. Then I called Margaret again. This time, I told her everything, calmly, precisely, every moment like pins on a map. She cried. I'm so sorry, Mama. I thought. I know, I said quiet. She's good at this. But not better than me. Margaret came 2 days later, her arms full of flowers and apologies. Adrian was gone before she arrived. Left in the night, taking only what she brought. Except for one thing. My favorite rose bush, the yellow hybrid Henry planted our first spring here, had been clipped down to the roots. Every petal gone. And that somehow hurt more than the rest. Grief, my dear, is not always about death. Sometimes it's about survival, standing in the ruins of what should have felt safe, breathing in the silence left behind. After Adrian left, the house felt strange. Not empty, not peaceful, just quiet in a way that pressed against my ribs. There were echoes in the floorboards where her footsteps used to pass at midnight. The couch cushions held the ghost of her weight. The scent of her lavender oil clung to the hallway like a stain. For a week, I moved through the house like a stranger in my own skin. Margaret stayed with me for a few days. She helped me rearrange the parlor, aired out the blue room, and packed away the pieces Adrian left behind. A brush in the bathroom drawer, a half-used journal, a single shoe tucked behind the closet door. She did a number on you, Margaret said one evening gently. And on me too. I should have listened. I didn't respond. There was no blame left in me, only exhaustion. But the world, it seems, never forgets a wound so quickly. At church, there were glances. Not cruel ones. Just hesitant, pitying, like folks didn't know which version of the story to believe. A few people pulled me aside, Alma, Pastor Glenn, even Ruth from the bakery, to apologize. We should have checked in with you. She had a way about her. Made you want to trust. I'm so sorry we didn't see it sooner. I nodded every time. But forgiveness doesn't bloom overnight. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope. No return address. The handwriting was neat. Controlled.
Familiar.
Ellie, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I never planned to stay forever. I just needed to remember what it felt like to be seen. You gave me that. I took too much. I see that now. I hope one day you can forgive me. I read it once. Then again. Then I burned it in the fireplace, watching the smoke rise like an unanswered prayer. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not about letting someone back in. Sometimes it's about letting the hurt out. I started planting again. The yellow rose bush Adrian destroyed had withered into brittle thorns. I dug up what was left, hands shaking, tears clouding my eyes. Henry had planted it with such care. But I knew somehow, it needed to be replaced, not forgotten but transformed. Margaret and I chose a new one together. A hardy climbing rose, deep crimson with flecks of gold in its center. We planted it near the porch steps, where sunlight hit longest. She held my hand after we covered the roots. This one's yours, she said. No one else's. And slowly, breath by breath, life began to return. By the end of that spring, the house began to settle again, not quite as it was before, but close enough to breathe in. Muffin returned to sleeping at the foot of my bed. Her little body pressed against my ankles like an apology. The garden, wounded though it was, began to green again. Evelyn brought over cuttings, peonies, lamb's ear, a stubborn little daisy that bloomed no matter the weather. You're not just rebuilding, she said, handing me a trowel. You're reclaiming. But still, there were reminders. I found her journal in the attic weeks later, tucked beneath a stack of old quilts. First, I didn't open it, just held it in my hands, feeling the weight of someone else's secrets. When I finally did, it wasn't what I expected. Pages and pages of sketches, not of her life, of me. Me in the garden. Me bent over letters at the kitchen table. Me holding a cup of tea with steam curling around my face like smoke. Always from a distance. Always observed. I closed the book and wrapped it in linen, placed it in a drawer I rarely touched. I didn't know if it was a love letter or a theft. Maybe both. Word traveled, as it always does in a place like Charleston. Someone said Adrian had moved to Savannah, that she was teaching art classes again, this time under a new name. Others said she was living with another older woman, a friend she met at a grief support group. I don't know what's true. I don't need to. What mattered was the truth I reclaimed in my own bones. I rewrote my will, clearer this time with Evelyn as a witness. I revised my emergency contacts. I joined a new book club, smaller and quieter, where no one interrupted and no one led. I started writing again, not in a leather-bound journal, but on loose paper I kept in the kitchen drawer. That way it never felt too precious to lose. Margaret visited more often. We had long talks on the porch about aging, about trust, about what it means to start again even when your hands are tired. One evening, she brought up assisted care again, gently, lovingly. I took her hand and said, "I'm still strong. But when I'm not, you'll know because I'll tell you. Not because someone else whispers it in your ear." She nodded, eyes wet. "I believe you." That, in the end, was the only thing I'd needed all along, to be believed. Seen not as fragile, not as fading, but as whole. That summer, the new rose bloomed early. Thick, red, defiant. And I sat on the porch swing, barefoot and quiet, watching it climb back toward the light. That summer was hot enough to melt the hush off a hymn. The kind of heat that made the air hum low and made every chore feel like a penance. Still, I rose early, before the sun stretched too wide, and walked the garden barefoot, watering the roots by hand. There was something about touching the soil that steadied me, made me feel tethered. Healing, I learned, is not a clean road. It's jagged, uncertain. It pulls you back at the strangest moments. Like the time I reached for a recipe card and found myself flinching, half expecting her handwriting. Or the evening I heard a Nina Simone song drifting from a neighbor's window, and had to sit on the porch until my hands stopped shaking. You don't just unbraid a life overnight, especially one someone else tried so hard to weave their way into. I started keeping a small notebook, not a journal exactly, but a record of things I still knew to be true. I wrote down the names of every friend who called, the taste of the peach cobbler I'd baked from scratch, the weight of muffins purr against my thigh. Simple things. Things Adrian had tried to tell me were slipping away. And every time I wrote one down, I felt stronger. There was one day, late July, when I sat at the edge of the pier near Folly Beach, a basket of sandwiches beside me, and thought. She almost made me forget who I was. Not because I was weak, because she was relentless. That's the insidious thing about manipulation, my dear. It's not about making you believe in them, it's about making you doubt yourself. Question your memory, your worth, your place. That doubt seeps in like fog. But on that pier, with the sea stretching out in front of me and my toes kissed by salt air, I remembered. I am Eleanor Whitford. Teacher. Widow. Mother. Friend. And no one gets to erase that. It was sometime in August when I found the mirror. Not just any mirror. The old oval one Henry and I bought at a flea market up in North Carolina, back when our hair was darker and our laughter louder. It had hung in the hallway for years, but I'd taken it down after Adrian left. I didn't want to see myself just yet. Not the tired face, not the doubts lingering behind my eyes, not the woman who had nearly been made a stranger in her own home. But that day something drew me to it. I carried it out to the porch, polished the glass with an old linen cloth, and sat with it in the warm dusk, looking. And I saw her. The woman I had been before Adrian. The lines around my mouth, the silver in my hair, the quiet steadiness in my gaze. Not fragile, not forgetful, just older, wiser, still here. I thought of Henry, what he might have said if he'd been alive to see what happened. He had a gift for seeing through people, gentle but sharp. He would have warned me, but he also would have reminded me, "Ellie, you've walked through worse storms and come out blooming." I whispered that aloud, just to feel the truth of it in my own voice. You see, healing isn't always a fire. Sometimes it's just a whisper that keeps returning until you finally listen. By late summer, the new rose had climbed halfway up the trellis. Its blooms opened wide, as if daring the sky to knock them down again. I hosted supper on the porch one night, just a few close friends, Evelyn, Alma, even June. We laughed over iced tea and cornbread, shared stories with the ease of people who knew each other before the rupture. No one asked about Adrian, and I didn't offer her name. Some wounds don't need explaining. Just a little space, a little sweetness, a place to sit and feel whole again. Later, as we cleared the dishes, Alma touched my arm. "You look more like yourself lately," she said. "I feel like myself," I told her. And I meant it. September rolled in on a hush of cool wind and rustling branches, and with it came a letter I didn't expect. It was from Margaret. Not an email, not a rushed voicemail between meetings, but a real letter. Ink on cream stationery, the kind she used as a teenager when she still believed in love notes and sealing wax. "Mama, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About how easy it was for me to believe her, and how hard it must have been for you to stand your ground when no one else did. You've always been strong. But I'm sorry I made you fight that battle alone. I want to come home more. Not out of guilt, but because I miss you. Love. M. I held that letter to my chest for a long time, eyes shut, breathing in its quiet apology. You see, sometimes the hardest part of betrayal isn't what the betrayer does. It's the echo of silence from those who should have known better. The ones you love. The ones who love you. And when they finally do see it, something shifts. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough. Margaret started calling more, asking real questions. Not just, "How are you, Mama?" but "What are you reading? Did Muffin catch that squirrel? What color is the sunset tonight?" Small things that tethered us again. One Sunday, she came for supper, bringing 2 pies and an apology I didn't ask for but received all the same. We sat on the porch, watching the light stretch long across the yard. She reached for my hand. I still feel guilty. I looked at her. Guilt is only useful if you grow something from it. She nodded. Then I want to plant better roots. That night, we clipped roses together. The new ones. Deep red. Resilient. I mailed cuttings to the church, to friends who drifted, to Evelyn with a note. "This rose bloomed from ruin. Keep it close." And I wrote something else that week, too. A letter. To Adrian. Not to send. Just to say what needed saying. You made me doubt my own hands, my mind, my memory. But you didn't break me. You showed me where I was still tender. Where I was still strong. And from now on, you have no part in my story. Ellie. Then I folded it, placed it beneath the same floorboard where Henry once kept his love letters to me. Some reckonings don't come with thunder. Some come with roses. Would you like me to continue with the second part of this act? It was early October when I decided to reclaim the blue room. For months after Adrian left, I'd avoided it, shut the door gently and let it sit untouched, like a wound I wasn't ready to dress. But something inside me was shifting. Not just healing, returning. I opened the door one morning, sunlight pooling across the faded rug, and I took a long breath. The air still held a faint trace of lavender, but it no longer felt like a ghost. Just a memory dusting itself off on the windowsill. I spent the whole day cleaning. Stripped the sheets. Washed the curtains. Took down the half-finished canvas she'd left behind. A watercolor of the garden, painted through the window, the colors soft and too exact, as if trying too hard to belong. I didn't burn it. I didn't keep it either. I wrapped it in brown paper, left it on the church donation bench with no name, no note. Let someone else decide its worth. Then I painted the walls a soft ivory. Hung up an old print of the Edisto Marshlands Henry had loved. I filled the room with books again, my books, and placed a small vase of fresh roses on the desk. It became a study, a retreat. Mine. And in that room I started writing something new. Not just my daily thoughts, not just names of blooms and weather reports, but stories. Real ones. Of women who survived quiet betrayals. Of houses that found their voices again. Of old southern towns where strength grew slow and steady, like moss on stone. Margaret read one of them. She wept. "Mama," she said, "you should share these. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. But they exist now. And that's enough. Because writing became the place where I didn't have to ask permission to exist. Where no one edited my truth or spoke over my silences. Where I remembered that even when someone tries to take your voice, you still get to choose the ending. And this ending, it belongs to me." By the time autumn fully settled, with gold in the trees and wood smoke curling through the alleys, I no longer looked over my shoulder. There was a calmness in the way the wind rustled the hydrangeas, in the slow ritual of lighting candles before supper, in how Muffin no longer flinched at creaking doors. Life had returned to its rightful rhythm. I started baking again, real baking, not just out of necessity. Pies, biscuits, a pound cake that nearly brought Evelyn to tears. I brought a warm loaf of cinnamon bread to the church, and left it without a name. Pastor Glenn smiled when he saw me in the pew the following Sunday. "Nice to have you back, Miss Ellie." I smiled back. I never left. At book club, I offered a story of my own. Not mine, not yet, but a fictional tale, loosely stitched with the threads of truth. They listened. They asked questions. They didn't need to know it was drawn from the well of my own pain. They simply heard me. That was enough. One afternoon as I was trimming the rose bush, now in its second full bloom, I saw a figure standing at the end of the sidewalk. Adrian.
No sutkas. No smile.
Just standing as if unsure of why she'd come. My breath caught, but I didn't move. Just held the shears in my hand steady as stone. She didn't step forward. She didn't wave. She only stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked away. And I let her go. No words.
No confrontation.
Just the silence of closure. The kind that blooms when you've done the hard work of healing and no longer need to prove a thing. That evening Margaret called. How's the rose bush? Strong, I said. Taller than I expected. So are you. I looked at the trellis, the deep red petals catching the last light of day, and I thought yes, so am I. Thanksgiving came with a softness I hadn't felt in years. Margaret and her husband arrived a day early, carrying too many bags and just enough laughter. She set the table with the good dishes. The ones Adrian once used without asking, and asked me where I kept the tablecloth Henry's mother embroidered by hand. In the cedar chest, I said, wrapped in lavender paper. She smiled. I love that you remember the details. I do. I always did. We cooked together, shoulder to shoulder, peeling sweet potatoes and humming old jazz tunes. She let me lead, let me teach. Not because I was fragile, but because I was the thread that held the recipe together. That night, we lit a candle for Henry, then one for my parents, and, without saying her name, one for the woman who taught me what I could survive. There's a kind of peace that only comes after fire. The kind that wraps around your shoulders like a shawl, warm and earned. I felt it then. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was whole again. Later, after the dishes were done and the pies were tucked away, I walked out onto the porch alone. The wind was gentle. The stars sharp and clear. And the rose. That crimson defiant bloom Henry would have called indecent in the best way, had opened again. One last flower before winter. I cupped it in my hand and whispered, "You made it." But I wasn't speaking to the rose. I was speaking to me. Tonight, as I sit at the writing desk in the blue room, the lamp casting its soft golden halo over the pages, I feel no fear in the quiet. Muffin sleeps beside me, curled into the crook of an old cardigan. The wind hums against the window panes, and the clock ticks steady, no longer a metronome of waiting, but a lullaby of presence. The house is still, but not hollow. Each room now holds me again. Not the echo of someone else's need. The parlor with its mismatched cushions, the kitchen with its dented tea kettle, the porch with the swing that creaks like it's telling secrets. All of it mine. Not because I guard it, but because I live in it fully and without apology. Sometimes I think of Adrian, not with hatred, not even sorrow. Just as a woman lost in her own hunger, who mistook someone else's life for shelter. I hope she finds peace. But I no longer carry her story in my mouth. I've started writing letters again. To old students. To distant cousins. To myself some days, reminders scrawled in looping script. You are not what was taken from you. You are what remains. And that's what I'd leave with you, my dear. If you've ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own skin, if someone once took your kindness as an invitation to occupy your soul, if the world tried to convince you that your fading was inevitable, let this story remind you, you are not fading. You are becoming. One bloom at a time. If I opened my home to her, then she took my job, my friends, and my life opened something quiet in your heart, my dear. I'd love to know what lingered. Leave me a note in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from, or share the name of someone who once needed someone like Ellie. And if you'd like to sit with me again for another story, please subscribe and share this tale with someone walking a similar road. Life's too short to let silence have the last word.